My name is Etta, 59 years old, and I've spent the last 30 years building a successful real estate business in Boston while raising my son Michael on my own. His father, my beloved James, died serving in Afghanistan when our boy was just 7. Michael has always been my world, so when he proposed to his girlfriend Veronica last spring, I was thrilled. I'd been saving for his wedding since he was 10 years old. But during the wedding planning, Veronica looked me straight in the eye and told me to stay in my lane. If you're watching now, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, hit that like button, and subscribe to hear exactly how this mother of the groom responded when her future daughter-in-law crossed the line. I grew up in a modest neighborhood in Lexington, Massachusetts, the daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. My parents weren't wealthy by any means, but they taught me the value of hard work, saving for the future, and treating people with respect. These values shaped me into who I am today, and they're what I tried to instill in Michael as I raised him. I met James Sullivan during my sophomore year at UMass Amherst. He was studying political science and had already committed to joining the military after graduation. There was something about his quiet confidence and unwavering sense of duty that drew me to him immediately. We dated for 2 years before getting married in a simple ceremony at my parents' church. I was 22 young and so in love. James was deployed several times during our early marriage. It was difficult being apart, but we made it work through letters and occasional phone calls. When I found out I was pregnant with Michael, James was overseas, and I had to tell him the news in a letter. He was ecstatic even from thousands of miles away. He managed to get leave just 2 weeks before our son was born, and the look on his face when he first held Michael is a memory I still cherish. For the first 7 years of Michael's life, we lived the typical military family lifestyle, moving around, making the best of short time periods together, and creating a stable home despite the circumstances. James was an incredible father during the time he had with Michael. He taught him to ride a bike, read him bedtime stories whenever he was home, and started a tradition of Saturday morning pancakes that I continued after he was gone. The day I received the news about James still feels like a bad dream. 2 uniformed officers at my door, their solemn faces telling me everything before they even spoke. James had been killed during an operation in Afghanistan. My world collapsed in that moment. Michael was at school, and I remember thinking, how do I tell my 7-year-old son that his father is never coming home? Those early years as a young widow with a grieving child were the hardest of my life. I had to be both mother and father to Michael while processing my own grief. We moved back to Massachusetts to be closer to my parents, and I took a job as an administrative assistant at a real estate office to pay the bills. The military benefits helped, but they weren't enough for the life I wanted to provide for Michael. I discovered I had a knack for real estate, understanding people's needs, finding them the perfect home, negotiating deals. Within 3 years, I had my license and was outselling most of the veterans in the office. 5 years after that, I opened my own brokerage. Every commission, every bonus, every success was motivated by one thing: securing Michael's future. When Michael was 10, I opened a special savings account. I called it the wedding fund, though it was really a future fund. Every month without fail, I deposited money into it no matter how tight things were. Sometimes it was just $50. Other times, when business was booming, I could put away $1,000 or more. Over 22 years, that account grew substantially. Michael was always a bright child, thoughtful like his father, with James's same considerate nature and steady presence. He excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and computer science. When he was accepted to MIT, I couldn't have been prouder. My careful financial planning scholarships and Michael's part-time jobs meant he graduated without the crushing student debt that burdens so many young people today. After college, Michael landed a job at a software company in Boston, developing security systems for financial institutions. He bought a condo in Cambridge with my help on the down payment and seemed to be thriving in his career. The only thing missing in his life from my perspective was someone special to share it with. He dated occasionally, but no one serious, until he met Veronica at a technology conference 3 years ago. She worked in marketing for a competing firm, and according to Michael, they hit it off immediately over a debate about data privacy. When he brought her to dinner at my house a month later, I was eager to meet the woman who had captured my son's attention. My first impression of Veronica was generally positive. She was undeniably intelligent, articulate, and ambitious. At 30, she was 2 years older than Michael and seemed very established in her career. She complimented my home and asked appropriate questions about my business. If I felt she was a bit reserved, perhaps even calculating in her responses, I chalked it up to first meeting nerves. Over the next few years as their relationship progressed, I saw Veronica at family gatherings, holidays, and occasional dinners. I made consistent efforts to build a relationship with her, remembering how difficult it had been with my own mother-in-law when James and I first married. I invited her for lunch, sent thoughtful birthday gifts, and always asked about her work accomplishments, which seemed very important to her. Looking back, I can see the warning signs I missed at the time. How Veronica would subtly redirect conversations to herself when Michael was sharing stories about his childhood, the way she would check her phone when I talked about James, her polite but firm deflection whenever I tried to include her in family traditions, the slightly condescending tone when she talked about my very traditional business rather than her cutting-edge tech marketing career. None of these things were dramatic enough to raise serious concerns. Michael seemed happy, and that was what mattered to me. When they moved in together after a year of dating, I brought them a home-cooked meal and a bottle of champagne, genuinely pleased to see my son building a life with someone he loved. 6 months ago, Michael called and asked to come over for Sunday dinner alone. He seemed nervous but excited, and I suspected what was coming. Sure enough, he announced that he had proposed to Veronica the night before at the restaurant where they had their first date, and she had said yes. I hugged my son tightly, truly happy for him. When he asked what I thought of Veronica, I told him the truth, that she seemed to make him happy, and that was what I wanted most. He then asked about wedding costs and seemed concerned about finances. That's when I revealed something I had been waiting years to share. I showed Michael the wedding fund statements. After 22 years of consistent saving and careful investing, the account had grown to just over $75,000. His eyes widened in disbelief. When I am dead and buried, this is how I want to be remembered as a mother, I told him. Not for the daily lunches I packed or the basketball games I attended, but for the way I planned ahead for his happiness, even when it seemed so far away. Michael was overcome with emotion. He hugged me for a long time, thanking me again and again. It was one of those perfect moments between a mother and her child that makes all the sacrifices worthwhile. The next weekend, Michael brought Veronica over for dinner to celebrate the engagement. When I told her about the wedding fund, I noticed how her eyes lit up at the mention of $75,000. While Michael looked at me with gratitude, Veronica looked at the potential dollar signs. It was subtle, but it was there, that quick calculation behind her eyes, before she composed her face into a grateful smile. If only I had recognized then what that momentary expression would foreshadow. But I was too caught up in the joy of my son's engagement and the excitement of the wedding planning ahead. I had no idea that my well-intentioned savings would become the catalyst for the most difficult period in my relationship with my son. The wedding planning began in earnest about a week after I revealed the existence of the wedding fund. Eager to be helpful and to build a stronger relationship with my future daughter-in-law, I invited Michael and Veronica to Sunday brunch at my home to discuss initial ideas and how I could support them through the process. I spent the entire morning preparing. I baked fresh scones using my mother's recipe, arranged a beautiful fruit platter, and made a quiche with farm-fresh eggs from the local market. I set the table with my good china, the set I'd been saving for special occasions, and placed a small vase of freshly cut flowers from my garden as a centerpiece. I wanted everything to be perfect for this first official wedding planning session. Michael arrived first, giving me a warm hug and immediately noticing the effort I'd put into the brunch. Veronica arrived 20 minutes later, and to my surprise, she wasn't alone. She introduced the stylish woman accompanying her as Marissa Chen, a professional wedding planner from one of Boston's most exclusive event planning companies. I tried to hide my disappointment. I had imagined this would be an intimate family discussion, a chance for us to bond over wedding dreams and ideas. Instead, Marissa immediately took control, opening her designer portfolio and speaking about venue options, color schemes, and catering possibilities as if she had already been hired. When I caught Michael's eye, he gave me an apologetic look and explained that Veronica thought a professional would help them navigate the process more efficiently. I nodded and served the brunch I had prepared, noticing that Marissa barely touched the food while she continued her presentation. Veronica seemed completely absorbed in Marissa's suggestions, particularly when she mentioned exclusive venues that regularly hosted celebrity weddings. When I gently suggested the beautiful botanical garden where James and I had been married, noting its sentimental value and reasonable pricing, Marissa exchanged a quick glance with Veronica before diplomatically explaining that the venue was perhaps a bit outdated for the modern, sophisticated event they were envisioning. The conversation inevitably turned to the wedding fund. I explained that while I was thrilled to provide this financial gift, I would like to be consulted on major expenses. After all, this was money I had carefully saved for over 2 decades, often making personal sacrifices to grow the fund. I wasn't asking for control, just inclusion in the decision-making process. Veronica's smile tightened noticeably. It was Michael who smoothly interjected, saying of course I would be consulted, and that they appreciated everything I was doing. Veronica nodded in agreement, but there was a coolness in her eyes that hadn't been there when she arrived. After brunch, when Michael went to the kitchen to help me clear the dishes, Veronica and Marissa huddled together over the wedding portfolio. I overheard fragments of their conversation, including Veronica saying, "She doesn't need to be involved in every detail," and Marissa responding, "Don't worry, we can manage her." Manage me. As if I were a problem to be solved, rather than the mother of the groom and the person providing the substantial financial backing for their wedding. Over the following weeks, a pattern emerged. I would be informed of planning meetings after they had already occurred. Decisions would be made, and I would be told about them afterward, usually by Michael rather than Veronica or Marissa. When I did attend venue visits, my suggestions were politely acknowledged and promptly ignored. The venue selection was particularly disappointing. I had researched several beautiful locations within their budget, including a historic mansion with gorgeous grounds that would have been perfect for the spring wedding they wanted. Instead, they selected the Grand Boston Hotel, the most expensive option on their list, with a hefty deposit that took a significant chunk out of the wedding fund immediately. When I expressed concern about the cost, pointing out that the hotel package alone would consume nearly half of the entire budget, Veronica coolly informed me that this was the standard for quality weddings these days. The implication that I was out of touch stung, especially since real estate had given me a very good understanding of property values and rental costs. One evening, about 2 months into the planning process, we had dinner at Michael and Veronica's condo. What started as a pleasant meal deteriorated when Veronica began discussing their wedding cake selection. When I mentioned that I still had the cake topper from my own wedding, a beautiful hand-painted ceramic piece that my mother had also used, Veronica didn't even try to hide her dismissal. "That's very sweet, Etta, but we're going for a much more contemporary aesthetic. Those vintage cake toppers are so outdated. Our cake will have a minimalist design, very architectural." "I understand modern tastes," I responded carefully. "I just thought it might be a nice tradition to incorporate. It would mean a lot to me, and I think it would have meant a lot to James to have that connection to Michael's wedding day." Veronica sighed. "I appreciate that you want to be involved, but we really do have a specific vision. Not everything needs to be a tribute to the past." Michael, clearly uncomfortable with the tension, quickly changed the subject. Later, as I was leaving, he walked me to my car and apologized for Veronica's bluntness. "She's just stressed about getting everything perfect," he explained. "She doesn't always phrase things diplomatically." I assured him I understood, even though the interaction had hurt more deeply than I let on. It wasn't just about a cake topper, but about the dismissal of family history and tradition, about the erasure of James's memory from his only son's wedding. As weeks passed, Veronica and Marissa formed an impenetrable unit, making decisions and simply informing me afterward. I received emails about charges to the wedding fund for deposits on a photographer, band, and florist I had never met or discussed. When I called Marissa to ask for more information, she would assure me that Veronica had approved everything, as if that were the only permission needed for accessing funds I had spent over 2 decades accumulating. After a particularly frustrating week where 3 large payments were withdrawn without any consultation, I confided in my best friend Diana over lunch. Diana and I had been friends since college, and she had known James and watched Michael grow up. She was usually my voice of reason in difficult situations. "You need to establish some boundaries, Etta," Diana said firmly. You're being incredibly generous with this wedding fund, but they're treating you like an ATM machine, not a mother with valid input." "I don't want to cause problems," I admitted. "Michael seems happy, and I don't want to come across as the difficult mother-in-law before the wedding even happens." Diana reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "There's a difference between being difficult and standing up for yourself. From what you're telling me, Veronica is systematically excluding you while happily spending your money. That's not okay, no matter how you look at it." She was right, of course. I had been so worried about being perceived as interfering that I had allowed myself to be completely sidelined. I decided to make one more genuine effort to meaningfully contribute to the wedding planning, to try to establish a collaborative relationship with Veronica before taking more drastic measures. When Marissa emailed about an upcoming appointment with the florist and actually included me on the invitation, I saw it as my opportunity. This would be my chance to find common ground with Veronica, to share something meaningful without imposing my will on their overall vision. Little did I know that this appointment would become the turning point in the entire wedding planning process. The florist appointment was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon at Bloom & Petal, one of Boston's most exclusive floral design studios. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly from habit and partly from excitement. This was the first planning aspect where I had been explicitly invited to participate, and I wanted to make the most of it. I had spent the previous evening looking through old photo albums, finding pictures of the white roses that had been James's favorite flowers. He had given me a bouquet of them on our first date, included them in my wedding bouquet, and brought them home for no reason at all throughout our marriage. After his death, I planted white rose bushes in our garden in his memory. I thought incorporating just a few white roses into the wedding flowers would be a beautiful, subtle way to honor Michael's father on his wedding day. I brought a small photo album with me, not to push a specific aesthetic, but to share the story and see if it resonated with Veronica. I imagined us finding a meaningful compromise, perhaps white roses in my mother of the groom corsage, or a small tribute arrangement at the ceremony. This wasn't about controlling their wedding vision, but about keeping James's memory alive in this important family milestone. The florist's studio was a feast for the senses, with fresh blooms arranged throughout the space and the subtle fragrance of flowers perfuming the air. The owner, Charlotte, greeted me warmly and offered tea while we waited for the others. I mentioned I was the groom's mother and showed her a few of my photos, explaining the significance of white roses to our family. Charlotte was touched by the story. "Family meanings like this are what make wedding flowers special," she said. "We can definitely incorporate this in a way that complements whatever overall design your daughter-in-law has in mind." 20 minutes after the appointed time, Veronica and Marissa arrived together, both looking surprised to see me already there and engaged in conversation with Charlotte. Veronica's smile tightened almost imperceptibly as she air-kissed my cheek in greeting. "Etta, you're early," she said, making it sound vaguely like an accusation. "Just punctual," I replied lightly. "Charlotte and I were getting acquainted. She's been showing me some of their recent wedding work." Marissa swiftly took control of the conversation, opening her portfolio and showing Charlotte the mood board they had created for the wedding flowers. The aesthetic was ultra-modern, featuring exotic orchids, tropical foliage, and sculptural arrangements. Everything was in shades of deep purple magenta and electric blue, with not a classic bloom in sight. As Charlotte walked them through options for executing this vision, I waited for a natural pause in the conversation. When they moved on to discussing ceremony arrangements, I gently interjected. I had a small suggestion. I began opening my photo album. These white roses were very special to James Michael's father. I thought perhaps we could incorporate just a few, maybe in my corsage or in a small memorial arrangement at the ceremony. It would mean so much to have this connection to Michael's dad at the wedding. There was an awkward silence. Charlotte looked expectantly at Veronica, whose expression had hardened. Marissa glanced between us, clearly sensing the tension. "We've already decided on a cohesive color story," Veronica said firmly. "White roses are completely off palette. They're also incredibly basic, honestly. Every wedding has roses." "It's not about the design aesthetic," I explained. "It's about the meaning, about having a symbol of Michael's father present on his wedding day." Charlotte attempted to mediate. We could certainly find subtle ways to incorporate them that wouldn't disrupt the overall design concept. Perhaps a small remembrance bouquet on a reserved seat or tucked into the groom's boutonniere. Before Veronica could respond, Marissa smoothly interjected, "Why don't we continue with the main arrangements and circle back to special requests afterward? We have a lot to cover today." For the next 40 minutes, I sat quietly as they discussed elaborate centerpieces, ceremony structures, and bridal party flowers, all without any acknowledgement of my suggestion or any attempt to include me in the decisions. The estimated total came to nearly $12,000, an amount that seemed excessive to me, especially considering some of the smaller local florists could have created beautiful arrangements for half the price. When Charlotte stepped away to take a phone call, Veronica turned to me with a tight smile. "Could I speak with you privately for a moment, Etta?" She led me to a small hallway near the restrooms away from Marissa and Charlotte. Once we were alone, her pleasant facade dropped completely. "Look," she said, her voice low but sharp, "I need you to understand something. You need to stay in your lane. This is my wedding." The bluntness of her statement felt like a physical blow. "I'm only trying to honor James's memory," I said quietly. "Michael barely had a father growing up. Having something of him at the wedding seems important." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "James has been dead for 25 years. Michael barely remembers him. We're not designing our wedding around a ghost." Her callous dismissal of my late husband, the father of her fiancé, left me momentarily speechless. The casual cruelty of referring to James as a ghost, rather than a beloved family member who had sacrificed his life in service to his country, was breathtaking. "Michael remembers his father." I finally managed my voice barely above a whisper. "And even if his memories are limited, mine aren't. James should be acknowledged at his only son's wedding." "This is exactly the problem," Veronica said, exasperation clear in her tone. "You're making this about you and your memories. This day is about Michael and me, our future, not your past. The money is for our wedding, not a memorial service." The mention of the money so casually thrown in clarified everything in that moment. To Veronica, I wasn't Michael's mother, or a grieving widow, or even a future family member. I was simply the source of funding for her elaborate wedding and ATM with an inconvenient voice attached. "I see," I said, fighting to keep my composure. "Thank you for being so clear about where I stand." We rejoined Marissa and Charlotte in uncomfortable silence. I maintained a polite facade through the remainder of the appointment, offering no further suggestions and responding to direct questions with minimal answers. Inside, my thoughts were racing, processing the interaction, and considering what it revealed about Veronica and what it might mean for Michael's future. When Charlotte asked about proceeding with the proposed arrangements, which would require a $4,000 deposit, I mentioned that I would need to review the proposal in detail before authorizing the expenditure. Veronica shot me a look of barely concealed irritation. Shortly afterward, I excused myself, claiming a client emergency that required my immediate attention. It wasn't true, but I couldn't bear to spend another minute in that suffocating atmosphere of hostility and disrespect. In my car, finally alone, the tears came. Deep, wrenching sobs that I hadn't allowed myself in years. I cried for James, whose memory had been so callously dismissed. I cried for Michael, engaged to someone who could speak so disrespectfully about his family. And I cried for myself for the hurtful realization that despite my efforts and generosity, I was viewed as nothing more than a checkbook and an inconvenience. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my sadness had transformed into something else entirely. A clear-eyed determination had replaced my tears. Veronica had told me to stay in my lane. Perhaps it was time I did exactly that, starting with reclaiming control of the wedding fund I had spent decades building. If Veronica wanted me to know my place, I would make sure she understood hers as well. This was no longer just about white roses or wedding decisions. It was about respect family values and ensuring my son wasn't making the biggest mistake of his life. Back in the quiet of my home, I took several deep breaths to center myself. The confrontation at the florist's had shaken me to my core, but now I needed to think clearly. I needed to consider my options carefully before taking any action that might affect my relationship with my son. First, I needed to understand exactly where things stood with the wedding fund. I went to my home office and pulled out all the relevant financial documents. When I had established the account, it was in my name only with the specific purpose of one day funding Michael's wedding. I had never legally transferred ownership of the funds to Michael or Veronica, though I had given them access to make approved wedding-related withdrawals. I logged into my online banking portal and reviewed the recent transactions. In the 2 months since the engagement, nearly $30,000 had already been spent or committed to deposits. The venue deposit alone was $15,000. There were charges for the wedding planner's retainer photography deposit and various other expenses that I had only vague knowledge of. This was moving much faster than I had anticipated and with far less transparency than I had been promised. At this rate, the entire fund would be depleted long before the wedding date, which was still 8 months away. I called Martin Lewis, my financial advisor of 15 years, and explained the situation. I needed professional guidance before making any decisions that could have significant repercussions. From a strictly financial and legal perspective, Etta, the money remains yours, Martin confirmed after reviewing the account details. You've never executed a gift transfer document, and the account remains solely in your name. You have every right to restrict access or even close the account entirely if you choose. I don't want to cause a family rift, I admitted, but I feel like I'm being taken advantage of and worse, deliberately excluded from a process that I'm fully funding. Perhaps a temporary restriction would send the right message, Martin suggested. Not permanently withdrawing the funds, but requiring your signature for any future disbursements. It would force a conversation without completely derailing the wedding plans. After thanking Martin for his advice, I spent the rest of the afternoon reflecting on the broader implications of Veronica's behavior. This wasn't just about wedding flowers or even about money. It was about respect, consideration, and what these early interactions might indicate about our future family dynamics. I thought about Michael caught in the middle between his mother and his fiancé. Had he noticed Veronica's dismissive attitude toward me? Was he aware of how I was being systematically excluded from the planning process? And more importantly, if this was how Veronica treated me now, how would she treat Michael once they were married? I reviewed my interactions with Veronica over the 3 years I had known her, looking for patterns I might have missed or dismissed. There had always been a certain coldness beneath her polite exterior, a reluctance to engage in genuine family connection. She rarely asked questions about my life or business, showed little interest in family stories or traditions, and seemed to tolerate rather than enjoy family gatherings. Michael had always explained this away as her being private or career-focused. But now I wondered if there was something more concerning at play. Was this someone who truly valued family, who would stand by my son through difficult times, who would create the warm, supportive home environment he deserved? By evening, I had made my decision. I called my bank and requested that the wedding fund account be modified to require my in-person signature for any withdrawals over $100. I didn't close the account or reclaim the money permanently, but I did establish a boundary that would necessitate direct communication moving forward. It was a significant step, and I knew there would be fallout. But sometimes love means making difficult choices, especially when you see someone you care about potentially heading toward harm. I wasn't trying to control Michael's life or choice of partner. I was simply creating a situation where honest conversation would be required before more of my hard-earned money was spent by someone who clearly didn't respect me. Almost immediately after making the change to the account, my phone began to buzz. The first call came from Marissa, the wedding planner, inquiring about a problem with the payment for the floral deposit. I calmly explained that there had been a change to the account access and that I would need to be directly involved in any future financial decisions. "This is highly irregular," Marissa said, clearly annoyed. "Veronica has already approved these expenses." "Yes, but I'm the one who saved this money for 22 years, and I need to be consulted on how it's spent," I replied evenly. "Please have Veronica contact me directly to discuss this further." I had barely ended the call when texts from Veronica started arriving. "What's going on with the wedding account? Marissa says the florist payment was declined. We had an agreement about these funds. This is completely inappropriate. You're jeopardizing our vendor relationships with this behavior." I responded with a single text, "We need to talk, all 3 of us. I'm available tomorrow evening at my home." Veronica's reply came quickly. "This is ridiculous and controlling. Release the funds immediately." I didn't respond. Setting this boundary was difficult enough without engaging in a text argument that would only escalate emotions. If Veronica wanted access to the wedding fund, she would need to have a face-to-face conversation where we could address the underlying issues directly. Michael called about an hour later, confusion evident in his voice. "Mom, what's happening with the wedding account? Veronica is really upset." "I know, sweetheart," I said gently, "and I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this. But there are some important things we need to discuss about the wedding planning process, and it needs to happen in person with all three of us present." "Can't you just tell me what's going on now?" he asked. "This involves all of us, and we should talk together," I insisted. "Can you and Veronica come over tomorrow evening around 7? I'll make dinner, and we can have an honest conversation." Michael sighed, clearly torn between his mother and his fiancée. "Okay, we'll be there. But Mom, please tell me this isn't you trying to control the wedding. You know how important this is to Veronica." His words stung, revealing that his first concern was for Veronica's feelings rather than understanding my perspective. "It's not about control, Michael. It's about mutual respect and consideration. We'll talk tomorrow." After hanging up, I sat in my living room as darkness fell, wondering if I had made the right decision. Was I overreacting to a bride's natural desire to control her wedding? Was I being too sensitive about Veronica's comment regarding James? Was my action going to irreparably damage my relationship with my son? These questions haunted me throughout a mostly sleepless night. But by morning, my resolve had strengthened. If my relationship with Michael could be severed simply by requesting accountability for how my money was being spent, then there were deeper problems that needed addressing before he committed his life to this marriage. I spent the day preparing for the evening's conversation, not just emotionally, but practically. I gathered records of all the wedding fund transactions, emails, and texts showing the pattern of exclusion, and even prepared Michael's favorite meal, beef bourguignon, as a reminder of our family bonds and shared history. As 7 o'clock approached, I set the dining room table with care, placing the relevant documents in a folder at my place setting. Whatever happened next would shape our family's future. I was nervous but determined to approach the conversation with honesty, clarity, and as much compassion as possible, even for Veronica. The doorbell rang precisely at 7. Taking a deep breath, I went to answer it, ready to face whatever came next. I opened my front door to find Michael and Veronica standing together on my porch, their body language telling different stories. Michael looked uncomfortable, but gave me a quick hug as they entered. Veronica's expression was tight, her greeting perfunctory. It was clear they had been arguing before arriving, likely about the situation with the wedding fund. "Something smells amazing," Michael said, trying to ease the tension as they followed me inside. "I made your favorite," I replied. "I thought we could talk over dinner." Veronica didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'd prefer to address the financial situation immediately. We have vendors waiting on payments." I kept my voice calm and measured. "The vendors can wait one more evening. This conversation deserves our full attention, and I think it will be more productive if we're not hungry. Please let's sit down and eat first." Michael gave Veronica a pleading look, and she reluctantly followed us to the dining room. I had set the table with care, using my good china and lighting candles to create a warm atmosphere despite the difficult conversation ahead. I served the beef bourguignon with fresh bread and a bottle of good red wine. Michael immediately helped himself to a hearty portion, while Veronica took only a small serving. For the first few minutes, we ate in strained silence. Michael attempted small talk about work and the unusually warm weather, but his efforts fell flat. Finally, after we had all eaten at least some of our meal, I decided it was time to address the elephant in the room. "I know you both want to understand why I've made changes to the wedding fund account," I began. "I want to explain my reasoning clearly, and I hope you'll both listen with an open mind." I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. When I revealed the existence of the wedding fund, I was so happy to be able to give you this gift. All I asked was to be included and consulted in the planning process, especially regarding major expenses. That hasn't happened. Veronica immediately started to protest, but I gently raised my hand. "Please let me finish. Over the past 2 months, I've been systematically excluded from most planning activities. Decisions are made without my input, and I'm simply informed afterward about charges to an account I spent over 2 decades building. I turned to Michael. Did you know that I wasn't consulted about the venue before the $15,000 deposit was paid, or that I've never met with the photographer or band that have already received substantial deposits? Michael looked genuinely surprised. I thought you were involved in those decisions. Veronica told me you had approved everything. That's not true, I said quietly. I've been informed after the fact, but never genuinely consulted. Veronica's cheeks flushed. You're making it sound like we've done something underhanded. These are standard expenses for a quality wedding. The fund is meant for our wedding, and we're using it appropriately. The issue isn't the expenses themselves, I clarified. It's the lack of respect and inclusion. And things came to a head yesterday at the florist's when you told me to stay in my lane and called James a ghost. Michael's head snapped toward Veronica. You said what about my dad? Veronica shifted uncomfortably. Your mother is exaggerating. She wanted to change our entire floral concept to include white roses because of some sentimental attachment. I simply explained that we needed to stay focused on our vision for the wedding. That's not an accurate representation of what happened, I said, keeping my voice even. I opened the folder beside me and removed a sheet of paper. You specifically said, and I quote, James has been dead for 25 years. Michael barely remembers him. We're not designing our wedding around a ghost. Michael looked stunned. Veronica, did you really say that about my father? She's taking it completely out of context, Veronica insisted, her voice rising. She's been trying to control every aspect of our wedding, inserting her outdated ideas everywhere. I was just setting a boundary. Is wanting a small tribute to Michael's father at his wedding really controlling? I asked. I wasn't asking to change your entire theme. I just wanted a few white roses, perhaps, in my corsage, or a small memorial arrangement. And I offered several compromise options. I continued. But you dismissed them all without consideration, and then told me to stay in my lane, as if I were an intruder rather than the mother of the groom and the person who saved for 22 years to make this wedding possible. Michael looked increasingly troubled. I had no idea this was happening. Mom, why didn't you tell me sooner? I didn't want to put you in the middle, I admitted, and honestly I kept hoping things would improve naturally. But yesterday made it clear that without intervention, I would simply be expected to provide money while having no voice whatsoever in the process. Veronica's expression had hardened further. This is about control. You can't accept that Michael has a life separate from you now. You're using your financial leverage to force your way into decisions that aren't yours to make. That's unfair, Veronica, I replied. I've always respected Michael's independence. I'm not trying to control your wedding. I'm asking for the basic courtesy of consultation and respect. I reached back into the folder and pulled out more documents. I also found these emails between you and Marissa discussing how to manage me. They make it quite clear that the intention all along was to minimize my involvement while maximizing access to the wedding fund. Michael took the printed emails, his expression growing more concerned as he read. Veronica, these sound really calculating. You called my mom the cash cow in this one and discussed how to keep her occupied with meaningless decisions while we handle the important stuff. Veronica's strategy shifted immediately. You went through my emails. That's a complete invasion of privacy. How dare you? I didn't hack anything. I clarified. These were in the wedding planning folder that Marissa shares with all of us. Perhaps you didn't realize I had access to the entire conversation thread. The revelation seemed to throw Veronica off balance. Her eyes darted between Michael and me, calculating her next move. Finally, her expression hardened into something resembling an ultimatum. This is ridiculous, she declared. Either you transfer the money back into the unrestricted account, or we'll simply elope. We don't need this level of interference in our lives. The threat hung in the air. Michael looked torn, clearly distressed by the escalating conflict between the two women he loved. After a long moment, he turned to Veronica. Can I speak with you privately for a minute? They moved to my living room while I remained at the table, giving them space, but still able to hear their conversation escalating into a heated argument. I busied myself clearing dishes, trying not to eavesdrop, but unable to avoid hearing snippets of their increasingly angry exchange. She's your mother, Veronica. You can't speak about my dad that way. You're taking her side again. She's manipulating you with guilt. These emails are pretty explicit. Why would you discuss my mom that way?" Their voices grew louder, and I retreated to the kitchen, running water to give them more privacy. After about 15 minutes of tense conversation, I heard Veronica's voice rise sharply. "You know what, fine? If you think I'm so terrible, maybe we should reconsider this whole engagement. I can't believe you're choosing her over me. It's not about choosing sides, it's about basic respect for my family." There was a moment of silence, and then Veronica's voice, cold and clear. "Your precious mother doesn't know everything. Half that money is already committed to things that aren't even for the wedding." Michael's response was immediate and shocked. "What are you talking about? What things?" Veronica seemed to realize she had said too much. "Nothing. Forget it." "No, tell me what you meant by that. What have you been spending the wedding fund on?" Their argument continued, revealing information that stunned even me. Apparently, Veronica had been directing some of the wedding fund toward personal expenses, including paying off credit card debt and making a down payment on a luxury car she had told Michael was a company lease. Finally, I heard the sound of my front door slamming. Looking cautiously into the living room, I found Michael alone, sitting on my sofa, with his head in his hands. Veronica had left, taking her ultimatum and secrets with her. I approached slowly, unsure of what to say. "Michael, are you okay?" He looked up, his expression a mixture of anger, confusion, and hurt. "She's been lying to me, Mom, about a lot of things, not just the wedding fund." I sat beside him, giving him space, but making it clear I was there for him. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I never wanted this to happen." "It's not your fault," he said quietly. "You were right to question things. I should have been paying closer attention." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Dad would have seen through her immediately, wouldn't he?" The mention of James brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Your father was an excellent judge of character, but we all can be blinded by love." Michael nodded slowly. "I need to figure out what's really been going on. Veronica mentioned credit card debt I knew nothing about, and apparently the car she told me was a company perk was actually purchased with money from the wedding fund." He looked at me directly. "I think I need to postpone the wedding at the very least." "Whatever you decide, I'll support you," I assured him. "The wedding fund will still be there if and when you're ready to use it, for the right reasons with the right person." He stood suddenly, looking exhausted. "I should go. I need to talk to Veronica again, get to the bottom of everything, figure out if there's anything here worth saving." I walked him to the door, my heart heavy for his pain, but relieved that the truth was finally emerging. As he was leaving, he turned and gave me a long, tight hug. "Thank you for looking out for me, Mom, even when it was hard." After he left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the remnants of our difficult dinner. The evening had gone nothing like I had expected. I had anticipated resistance, perhaps even anger, but not the complete unraveling of Michael and Veronica's relationship. I felt a complex mixture of emotions: sadness for Michael's pain relief that the truth had emerged before the wedding, and uncertainty about what would happen next. I hadn't intended to cause the potential end of their engagement, but I couldn't regret standing up for myself and ultimately for my son's best interests. As I finally prepared for bed, I realized that telling Veronica to stay in her lane had been her greatest mistake, because my lane had always been and would always be doing whatever was necessary to protect my son and the future happiness he deserved. The 2 weeks following our confrontational dinner were filled with uncertainty and strained communication. Michael had returned to Veronica's apartment that night, determined to get honest answers about her financial deceptions. What happened next came to me in fragments through brief phone calls and text messages that revealed a rapidly deteriorating situation. Apparently, their conversation had quickly escalated into a major argument when Michael demanded to see Veronica's financial records and credit card statements. Her initial defensiveness gave way to accusations that he didn't trust her, followed by tearful admissions that painted a troubling picture of their relationship. 3 days after our dinner, Michael called me sounding exhausted but resolute. "Mom, I'm staying at Dave's place for a while," he said, referring to his college roommate who lived nearby. "I need space to think clearly." "What happened?" I asked, concerned but careful not to pry too deeply. "It's worse than I thought," he replied. "Veronica has over $40,000 in credit card debt that she never told me about, and she's been using the wedding fund to make minimum payments and buy things she claimed were gifts from her parents or perks from work." His voice caught slightly. "Including the engagement ring. She told me it was a family heirloom from her grandmother, but she actually used money from the wedding account to buy it online." I was stunned by the extent of the deception. "Oh, Michael, I'm so sorry." "There's more," he continued. "I found emails between her and Marissa discussing how to maximize the wedding fund spending before I might come to my senses at the influence of my controlling mother. There were even jokes about how they could justify a $4,000 designer dress as a necessity." Each revelation felt like another blow, not just to Michael's relationship, but to the future he had been planning. "What are you thinking of doing now?" I asked gently. "I don't know," he admitted. "The wedding is obviously postponed at minimum. I told the venue to hold our deposit, but not to proceed with any further planning. I just need time to figure out if there's anything here worth salvaging." Over the following days, I heard scattered reports from mutual acquaintances about the wedding being on hold. Several of Michael's friends called me directly concerned about him and asking what had happened. I kept my responses vague and protective of Michael's privacy, simply confirming that the wedding planning was paused while they worked through some issues. Diana invited me to lunch a week after the confrontation, clearly worried about how I was handling everything. "Are you okay, Etta?" she asked as we settled at our favorite cafe. "This can't have been easy for you being caught in the middle of such a mess." "I'm worried about Michael," I admitted, "but I can't help feeling that discovering Veronica's true nature before the wedding was a blessing in disguise, however painful right now." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "Better an ended engagement than a difficult divorce. Still, I know how much you wanted Michael to find lasting happiness." "I do," I agreed. "But not with someone who would lie to him about fundamental things like finances and who would treat his family history and his father's memory with such disrespect." 2 weeks after our confrontational dinner, Michael finally came to my house for Sunday brunch. He looked tired, but somehow clearer, as if a weight had been lifted despite the obvious pain he was still processing. Over coffee and homemade blueberry muffins, he shared what had transpired since we'd last really talked. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Mom, and some investigating, too." He had discovered that Veronica's deceptions extended beyond finances. She had been disparaging me in texts and emails to her friends for years, mocking my career, my home, even my grief over James. Michael had found these messages when he borrowed her laptop to check their joint accounts and saw notifications popping up on her screen. "She called you the widow martyr in messages to her friends," he said, his voice tight with anger. "She made fun of how you still keep Dad's picture on your bedside table. Who does that? Who mocks someone for loving their spouse even after they're gone?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Someone who doesn't understand real love or commitment," I said softly. Michael nodded, squeezing my hand in return. "That's what I've realized. Veronica doesn't value the things that matter most to me, like family, honesty, and respect. I was so caught up in her intelligence and ambition that I ignored the warning signs." "We all have blind spots when we're in love," I assured him. "Your father and I had our issues too, especially early on." Michael smiled faintly. "But you worked through them with honesty, right? You didn't lie to each other about fundamental things." "No," I agreed. "We always faced problems together as a team." "That's what I want," he said decisively. "And I've realized I won't have that with Veronica. Ever." He went on to explain that he had formally broken off the engagement 3 days earlier. Veronica had alternated between tearful pleas for another chance and bitter accusations that I had orchestrated everything to sabotage their relationship. When those tactics failed, she had finally revealed her true colors, completely threatening to tell everyone that he had cheated on her unless he agreed to a significant parting settlement from the wedding fund. "She actually tried to blackmail me," Michael said, still sounding shocked. "Even though it wasn't true. She said people would believe her, and it would ruin my reputation professionally." I was appalled, but not entirely surprised given everything else we had learned about Veronica's character. "How did you respond?" "I recorded the conversation," Michael said with a grimness that reminded me of his father's determination. Then I told her that if she spread any lies about me, I would release the recording and all the evidence of her financial deceptions to everyone we know, including her boss. She backed down pretty quickly after that. The conversation paused as we both absorbed the ugliness of the situation. Finally, Michael looked up with an expression I hadn't seen since he was a small boy, seeking reassurance. "Did I make a huge mistake, Mom?" Not about ending it, but about not seeing who she really was sooner. "No, sweetheart," I said firmly. "You saw the best in someone, which is never a mistake. The mistake would have been ignoring the truth once it became clear." Just as we were finishing brunch, Michael's phone rang. He checked the screen, and his expression shifted to surprise. "It's Veronica's parents," he said before answering cautiously. What followed was a surreal conversation. Apparently, Veronica had told her family that I had stolen back the wedding fund without warning and forced the cancellation of the wedding out of spite. Her parents were calling to try to understand what had really happened, as Veronica's story had seemed increasingly questionable to them. Michael calmly explained the actual situation, including Veronica's financial deceptions and her disrespectful behavior toward me and his father's memory. He was factual and measured, avoiding unnecessary cruelty while being honest about why the relationship had ended. After he hung up, he explained that Veronica's parents had been genuinely shocked and apologetic. "They said they've seen patterns like this before," Michael said quietly. "Apparently, Veronica has had issues with compulsive spending and dishonesty since college. They thought she had addressed these problems in therapy, but clearly she hadn't." This new information added another layer of complexity to an already painful situation. It was one thing for Veronica to have hidden financial issues, but quite another to have hidden ongoing psychological struggles that affected her behavior in fundamental ways. Had Michael known about these challenges, he might have been able to make more informed choices about their relationship from the beginning. As Michael prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I've been thinking about the wedding fund," he said. "I'd like to use part of it to start therapy. This experience has made me realize I need to understand why I didn't see the warning signs, why I was so quick to dismiss your concerns about Veronica." "I think that's an excellent use of the money," I said sincerely. "Whatever helps you heal and grow stronger from this experience." He hugged me tightly before leaving. "Thanks for having the courage to stand up for what was right, Mom, even when it wasn't easy." After Michael left, I sat in my quiet house reflecting on the tumultuous events of the past 2 weeks. The wedding that had been 8 months in the planning was now canceled. My son was hurting, but also healing. And the wedding fund that had caused so much conflict would now serve a different, perhaps more valuable purpose in supporting Michael's emotional well-being. It wasn't the outcome I had anticipated when I first modified the wedding fund account, but as I looked at James's photograph on the mantel, I felt a sense of peace. Somehow I knew he would have approved of how things had unfolded, painful though the process had been. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is stand firm when it would be easier to give in. And sometimes staying in your lane means keeping your hands firmly on the wheel, especially when the road ahead looks dangerous. A full year passed before the dust truly settled from the broken engagement. During that time, Michael focused on his healing process, diving into therapy with the same determination he brought to everything in his life. He moved into a new apartment, poured himself into his work, and gradually reconnected with friends who had been somewhat sidelined during his relationship with Veronica. As for Veronica herself, she had moved to Seattle 3 months after the breakup, accepting a position with a rival tech company. According to mutual connections, she was already dating someone new, a wealthy executive 20 years her senior. Michael received this news with nothing more than a raised eyebrow and a comment that his replacement should check his credit card statements regularly. The wedding fund, once the source of so much conflict, had been repurposed. After covering Michael's therapy expenses, we decided together to convert it into a house down payment fund. Property values in Boston continued to rise, and Michael was interested in eventually buying something more permanent than his current rental. The symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. A fund originally intended to celebrate a new beginning was still serving that purpose, just in a different and ultimately healthier way. On a crisp fall Saturday, almost exactly a year after what would have been the wedding day, Michael invited me to lunch at our favorite Italian restaurant. He looked better than he had in months. his eyes clear and his smile genuine as he held my chair. "You look wonderful," I told him as we settled with our menus. "Therapy seems to be agreeing with you." He chuckled. "Dr. Levine says I'm making excellent progress. Apparently not everyone spends a full year dissecting a broken engagement, but she says my thoroughness is admirable." We ordered our usual dishes, the comfortable familiarity of shared favorites, a reminder of our strong bond. As we waited for our food, Michael's expression grew more serious. "I wanted to thank you, Mom," he said, "for having the courage to do what you did with the wedding fund. It wasn't just about the money, was it?" "No," I admitted. "It was about recognizing patterns that worried me and creating a situation where we had to address them directly. I was terrified of damaging our relationship, but more afraid of seeing you commit your life to someone who didn't truly respect you or your family." Michael nodded thoughtfully. "Dr. Levine and I have talked a lot about why I didn't see the red flags with Veronica. Part of it was being blinded by her intelligence and ambition qualities I genuinely admired. But I've also realized I have a tendency to avoid conflict to smooth things over rather than address problems directly." "You get that from me," I said with a small smile. "Your father was much better at confronting issues head-on." "I remember," Michael said softly. "One of my clearest memories of Dad is him sitting me down after I lied about breaking a neighbor's window. He wasn't angry, just deeply disappointed that I hadn't been honest. That hit harder than any punishment could have." The mention of James brought a familiar ache, but also warmth. "He would be so proud of how you've handled this past year," I told him, growing from difficulty instead of being broken by it. Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. As we began eating, Michael shared news of a potential promotion at work, one that would involve relocating to their Austin office. He seemed excited about the opportunity, though conflicted about moving farther away from me. "You should absolutely pursue it if it's what you want," I encouraged him. "I'm not going anywhere, and Austin is just a flight away. We can visit each other regularly." "You'd be okay with me moving that far?" he asked, seeming genuinely uncertain. "Michael, I've always wanted you to build your own life," I assured him. "That's what the wedding fund was always about, supporting your journey forward, whatever shape it takes. My love doesn't come with geographic restrictions." He smiled, relief evident in his expression. "I was worried you might feel abandoned, especially after everything we've been through this year." "Never," I said firmly. "Being a mother means celebrating your child's independence, not clinging to dependence." As we finished our lunch, Michael reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small box. "I got you something," he said, sliding it across the table. "A thank you, and also a promise." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a white rose crafted in intricate detail. I looked up, my eyes filling with tears as I recognized the significance. "Dad's favorite," Michael said. "I had it custom made. I want you to know that I understand now how important it is to honor our family history, to keep those connections alive even as we move forward." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's beautiful. Thank you." "I've been thinking about Dad a lot this year," Michael continued, wondering what advice he would have given me about Veronica, about the wedding, about everything that happened. "And what conclusions have you reached?" I asked. "That he would have told me to trust my instincts more, to value honesty and integrity over flashy exteriors, to remember that how someone treats family says everything about who they really are." He paused, then added with a small smile, "And to listen to my mother occasionally because she's usually right." I laughed at that last bit. "Only occasionally." As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, Michael mentioned a new woman he had met through work, speaking of her with a careful consideration that was noticeably different from how he had initially described Veronica. He was proceeding slowly, taking time to really get to know her character before allowing his emotions to run ahead of his judgment. "I'd like you to meet her eventually," he said. "Not as any big statement, just a casual dinner sometime. She actually asked about you, wanted to know what you like so she could bring an appropriate hostess gift when we do meet." The contrast with Veronica's approach was striking. "She sounds thoughtful," I replied. "I'd love to meet her whenever you feel the time is right." Before we parted ways, Michael suggested we visit James's grave together the following weekend. "We could bring white roses," he said. "Make it a small tradition, just the two of us." "I'd like that very much," I agreed, touching the rose charm on my new bracelet. As I drove home afterward, I reflected on the journey of the past year. What had begun as a painful confrontation over a wedding fund had evolved into a profound opportunity for growth, honesty, and renewed connection. The wedding that never happened had in its own way given us gifts more valuable than any celebration could have provided. I thought about the difficult decision I had made to restrict the wedding fund the moment I had chosen to stay firmly in my lane rather than allow myself to be sidelined in my own son's life. It had been a risk, one that could have backfired terribly. Instead, it had catalyzed a necessary awakening, painful in the moment, but ultimately healing for all involved. As mothers, we walk a delicate line with our adult children, wanting to protect them while respecting their autonomy, offering guidance without controlling. There's no manual for navigating these complex waters, no clear map for when to speak up and when to stay silent. We can only act from love, from our deepest instincts about what serves their highest good, and hope that the bonds we've built over decades are strong enough to weather temporary storms. In the end, the wedding fund had fulfilled its purpose, though not in the way I had originally envisioned. It had provided not for a wedding, but for clarity, for growth, for a chance to rebuild on stronger foundations. And as I arrived home and placed my new bracelet beside James's photograph, I felt his presence more strongly than I had in years. A quiet affirmation that sometimes the most loving gifts we give our children aren't the ones that bring immediate joy, but those that guide them toward lasting happiness. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love, even when they might not initially appreciate it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you faced similar challenges with adult children or in-laws, please share how you navigated those complex relationships. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, subscribe for more real-life stories, and share with anyone who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Remember, sometimes staying in your lane means keeping a firm grip on the wheel, especially when you can see dangers that others might miss. Thank you for listening, and may your own family journeys be filled with honesty, respect, and genuine love.